Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party candidate and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. In this podcast, we call Green Socialist Notes. It's about continuing to educate and advocate and organize around the eco socialist program that Angela Walker and I ran on in 2020. So, today I want to talk about the fact that there are mass people's movements going on in many places around the world, but not in the US. And that's something we got to think about. But I'm going to talk about Ukraine, Iran, and Haiti, and then compare that to the US. So you look at Ukraine and what the Ukrainian people have done to resist the Russian invasion can only be called a people's war. It's a mobilization that's not just into the military, but mutual aid across the whole society. And when the war started, every government, the US, the EU governments, Russia thought Russia was just going to roll over Ukraine. And the US, was offering to evacuate Zelensky to set up a government in exile. And instead, the Ukrainians halted the Russian advance. And since March 21st, at the peak of the Russian advance, the Ukrainians have taken back over 30,000 square miles. A lot of them in the last month in September in the Kharkiv and Kherson regions. So what Russia's doing now is just lobbing missiles and drones they're getting from Ukraine, so-called kamikaze drones, to attack energy and water infrastructure all across Ukraine, far from the military front lines. These are not military targets, they're civilian targets, and they're straight up war crimes. And with winter coming, it's clear that Russia wants Ukrainians to freeze and increase the number of refugees and internally displaced persons, which is already a third of the country, over 13 million people. But a lot of people may be running off to Europe just to stay warm. So it's pretty brutal what's going on. And then in the areas that Russia does control, they are forcibly transferring people in these occupied territories. Right now, Kherson is the focus of this. Russia's trying to get all the people there to evacuate to the Russian occupied territories across the Dnipro River. They're doing things like turning off elevators in apartment buildings. And forceful population transfers are a crime against humanity under international law. The Human Rights Watch has documented many of these cases of people who have been forcibly transferred and escaped from Russia and talked about their situation. Russia itself claims they've taken nearly, or they say they voluntarily went, 3 million people, including 500,000 children, transferred from the Russian occupied territories to Russia proper. And on their way to Russia, they go through these filtration camps where people are interrogated to see where their loyalties lie. And if they're with Ukraine, a lot of them are jailed, sometimes tortured, or just simply disappeared. And then their children are put up for adoption in Russia. And again, these are crimes against humanity. And now we have a situation where Russia and Ukraine are accusing each other of preparing to blow up the Kakova Dam on the Dnipro River in the Kherson region. Now, the Russians say Ukraine has been bombing that dam. They did bomb bridge crossings over a water channel so that Russia couldn't bring military equipment over the dam into Kherson, the western side of the Dnipro River. And Ukraine is accusing Russia of having mined the dam so they could blow it up. And if they did, it would take out about 90 towns downstream. It would be catastrophic, and a lot of people would die. And it would also endanger the cooling of the 6-reactor Zaporizhzhia nuclear complex upriver. And it was also endanger the water supply of the Crimean Peninsula. If it happened, it would be one of the greatest war crimes of history. Hopefully, both sides are, accusing the others of things they're not really going to do, because it's hard to see why this would be in Russia's interest if they want to keep Crimea to lose their water supply. But I don't know. It's a very fraught situation. But unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago now, the National Committee of the Green Party passed a resolution calling for an end to arms to Ukraine, an end to sanctions against Russia, and a call for negotiations. Now, the National Committee voted on that. It was close. It was 48 to 44 with 8 abstentions. And a lot of people, I think, ducked the issue because I know regular voters didn't vote on this thing. And I think the resolution is terrible. I mean, they want to end arms to Ukraine as their infrastructure is being destroyed by missiles. Why can't Ukraine have, anti-missile systems so they can knock these missiles out? They do have some, but they don't have the first-rate stuff that could be supplied. And the timing of this resolution, it passed on midnight on a Sunday, which was morning in Ukraine when this barrage of missiles and kamikaze drones started. And it's been going on for 2 weeks now. And they say 30 to 40% of Ukraine's power has been put out. They put their air defenses around the big cities. So yesterday, Russia targeted the smaller cities in the rural areas. And with this going on, the Green Party saying disarm Ukraine. I think that's reactionary. And then they want to lift the sanctions at a time when Russia is having trouble producing these missiles. They do have sophisticated missiles, but their production is having a problem because they can't get the chips because of sanctions. And so they're turning to Iran and North Korea for drones and missiles and other military equipment. Yet the U.S. wants to end the sanctions that have disarmed the Russian aggressors to some extent. And then the resolution calls for resolutions 2 days after Putin gave his fascistic annexation speech, in which he said, yeah, I'm ready to negotiate, but the occupied territories are not up for negotiation. They're non-negotiable. That's like telling the Palestinians to accept Israeli settlements on the West Bank for the sake of peace. And there's no reason to believe that either the Israelis or the Russians will stop grabbing land in exchange for this so-called peace. They are the aggressors in these situations. And Putin's speech, I mean, some people have considered it anti-imperialist. It was a reactionary speech that claimed to be protecting the world from the quote-unquote satanic, homosexual, transsexual agenda of the West. And he went through a long litany of the colonial crimes of the West, which are true, but he totally ignored how the Russian Empire was built. You know, conquering peoples in Central and Eastern Asia and South and Eastern Europe, or at the same time, this was all going on, the Ottoman Empire, which enslaved 2.5 million Ukrainians and other Southeast Europeans. At the same time, African enslavement of up to 10 million Africans was going on in the 15th to 19th centuries. So it was a very skewed look. So he could posture as an anti-imperialist as he's trying to recolonize Ukraine. And it's amazing to me that some people on the left, they call themselves on the left, can't see through that hypocrisy. And, you know, this Green Resolution was adopted without talking to our political comrades in Ukraine, and the Green and the Socialists, the Anarchists, and the trade union left. And to me, that's typical US-centric Yankee imperialist ignorance and arrogance. You know, it's very parochial. It's typical of Americans who don't know what's going on in the world. And then they're here telling the Ukrainians basically to accept occupation of their land for the sake of peace, which isn't going to come, because Russia's not going to stop. They want to colonize Ukraine. It's a former colony of the Russian Empire and in the Soviet Empire. And Putin wants it back with his, clash of civilizations nonsense about the Russian world and the Ukrainians just being confused Russians who speak a dialect, not a language, Ukrainian. And then some people even go further and say we should support Russian imperialism because it's against Western imperialism. But that in itself is a reactionary imperialist ideas. Sometimes these people say they want a multipolar world. Putin and his acolytes in the US are saying that. What they're really advocating for is a multi-imperialist world. The traditional left position is we want to end capitalism that engenders inter-imperialist competition and wars. And that seems to be absent from some of these people on the left. So I'm pretty disgusted with that resolution, even though the Green Party was divided on it. At the same time, they passed the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal plank that I authored with help from a number of Greens around the country. So I'm not going to quit the Green Party over this, but I'm gonna fight for a position where we're against all imperialisms and in solidarity with people, not states, especially reactionary, authoritarian, imperialist states like Russia. So I got up at 5 this morning. I did it yesterday to listen to panels of a conference that's been put on by the Journal of the Ukrainian Left called Commons. And it has this conference on reconstruction and justice in post-war Ukraine. So they're already looking forward to how they can rebuild Ukraine on a socialist basis. So yesterday I listened to sessions on socialist economic reconstruction after the war. Yulia Yushchenko, who I had on this podcast about a month ago, early September, was one of the panelists. And then there was a second panel of trade unionists who are fighting Zelensky's neoliberal deregulation of labor standards in Ukraine, as well as fighting the Russian invasion. I mean, these trade unionists are, in the territorial defense of the Ukrainian military, and they were talking about the labor movement during, because they're fighting Zelensky, and after the war. And then this morning, I attended an excellent panel, basically for a Green New Deal for post-war Ukraine. And then tomorrow, there are panels on prospects for the Ukrainian left in and after the war. And that will be, the panelists will be people from the socialist social movement of Ukraine and the anarchist solidarity collectives. It's a very non-sectarian conference. So, socialists and anarchists are talking to each other constructively. And then there's a second session tomorrow, later in the morning, on building an international socialist anti-imperialism and peace during and after the war. And if you want to catch that, you could go to the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. That's a European group. They, I think, have a link to this, or go to Commons, the journal, and you can listen to it live. But these sessions will be online in the future, and the panelists are going to publish many of their presentations in that journal, Commons. And I recommend that people, we can't be talking about other countries without talking to the people in those countries. And, I'm really taken by three things about this conference and my encounters with the left in Ukraine and Russia and Poland and the rest of the East European post-Soviet, what they call the post-Soviet space. One is their level of analysis is much more informed and radical than we are here in the US. They're anti-capitalist and they know what the hell's going on. They aren't speculating like people sitting around a bar, like people do on Facebook. It's really impressive. And I'm a bit envious of them. Their viewpoint is far more internationalist than the parochial U.S. left. In this conference, it's not just Ukrainians, it's Poles, Russians, Germans, and British experts bringing their expertise to these panels. And the other thing is, they have differences. The anarchists and the socialists don't agree. There was a debate on nuclear power. There was a Polish leftist who made the argument that seasonal intermittency of renewables, solar and wind, means you need nuclear as baseload. But others contested him. But it wasn't the kind of petty ad hominem and smears that are endemic in the U.S. left and really U.S. politics generally. So I urge people to, read these people's stuff, listen to their online conferences. I think we have a lot to learn from them as a left in the U.S. So while you have this mass people's war going on in Ukraine, we also have an uprising in Iran. And of course, it started with the death of Gina Mahsa Amini. I say Gina, that's her Kurdish name because of the Persianization, basically ethnocide that the theocracy is trying to impose. On their official papers, they have to have a Persian name. So Gina, as she's known in her Kurdish community, is Mahsa on her paperwork, Amini. And of course, she died in Iranian morality police custody. That kicked off the demonstrations. The sixth week begins now. And there were massive protests again yesterday after Friday prayers. And I think it's significant. This movement's different from previous rebellions. The Green Movement against rigged elections back in 2009 and many protests over economic demands since. They're not appealing to the reformists within the regime. They want to overthrow the regime. They took their slogan from the leftist Kurdish women's movement in Rojava, the Kurdish majority region in northern Syria. It's women, life, freedom. But now the movement is more than about the hijab and the morality police. The demands are now revolutionary, and they're calling for a secular democratic state. The slogans are death to the dictator, death to the Basijis, which is the government police force that's been attacking and killing many demonstrators. The problem in in Iran, is that this theocratic regime has crushed the left. I mean, when they consolidated power, they imprisoned all the leftists who helped overthrow the Shah. And then in 1988, they just mass executed those that were still around in prison. And it's been, what organization there is on the left is underground. The best organizations are through the trade unions. The oil workers have started to come out in solidarity strikes. That was a big factor in the 1979 revolution that overthrew the Shah. But the problem they face is they don't have an organized left force ready to take power with a progressive program that the people can unite around. So I don't know where this is going to end up. But one thing is the people, and particularly the young people, the young women, they've had it. And they're risking their lives to say, we want something new. It's something to keep an eye on and express our solidarity with. And then another place where there's huge demonstrations, been going on all summer. There are big demonstrations yesterday, is in Haiti. And this is where civil society is more organized. Over 650 pro-democracy organizations have come together to demand the resignation of the dictator, Ariel Henry, new elections, and no foreign military intervention. They've come together in what's called the Commission for a Haitian Solution to the Crisis, also known as the Montana Accord. And Biden's policy here has been terrible. He supported the dictator, Ariel Henry, who came to power after the assassination of the previous dictator, Jovenel Moise. And there's a lot of evidence that Ariel Henry was in on that assassination. And both these dictators have been ruling by decree without a parliament. And, Biden is now, and the UN is now preparing for another round of intervention, which, there's a terrible record about that. There's a long history of U.S. intervention going back to 1914, where we installed governments friendly to U.S. business that can take advantage of cheap labor in Haiti. More recently, the U.S. has backed the overthrow of Aristide, who was a progressive, for the second time in 2004, and the U.S. flew him to the Central African Republic while the coup was going on. And basically, according to Aristide, they told him, you leave with us or you're going to get killed. And that was because he had been overthrown by a previous coup in 1991. The Clinton administration helped restore him to power to make it look like, Haiti was not such a dictatorship. But the condition was that Aristide implement Clinton-style neoliberal economic policies, deregulation, privatization, not raising the minimum wage, which Aristide had done. And by 2004, now the Bush administration is in power, and Aristide starts reneging on some of these promises. He didn't get reelected in 96, he got reelected in 2000. And in 2004, they flew into the Central African Republic. Meanwhile, while Haiti is, very dangerous situation, Biden has cruelly deported 25,000 Haitians under Title 42, which is that Trump-era law that allows immigration authorities to just bypass asylum procedures and send people back because of the COVID crisis. Why not test those people, quarantine the sick, and vaccinate them? I mean, that would be a humane solution. Instead, we're just flying them back to Haiti, where, many of them have targets on their back. That's why they tried to get asylum in the U.S. So, right now it's important that we demand that the U.S. and the UN stay out of Haiti militarily, and that Haitian refugees not be summarily deported, and that, we provide humanitarian aid in a way that actually gets to the people that need the help. But so anyway, you've got mass movements in countries like Ukraine and Iran and Haiti. And here in the U.S., we're inert, even though there's more and more evidence that, Trump, tried to overthrow that election. was ready to, promote violence to do it. And, the Democrats are campaigning against that. But of course, the top issue on people's minds is inflation in the economy. Now, if the Democrats do manage to maintain control of the House and Senate, little good is going to get done. I mean, they've had it and they haven't got it done. We maybe get some COVID funding, which hasn't been done for public health. But what are they offering to the voters? Ask yourself. When you think of what the Democrats are saying they're going to do, what are they going to do? I mean, basically, they're running a reactive defensive campaign against the Republican assault on democracy and attacks on abortion rights, which is fine. But to the people sitting around figuring out how they're going to pay their rent, what are the Democrats offering? And the Republicans are hammering away. They're blaming the Democrats for the economic problems. Republicans don't have no solutions. And the other thing the Republicans doing are fear-mongering about crime and immigration. And the Democrats, at least Biden and the top leadership, are responding by agreeing with the Republicans. They're calling for more police and continuing many of Trump's immigration policies, like the stay in Mexico or the Title 42, deportations. So, the Democrats are not offering voters, particularly those on the fence, a reason to vote for them. Now, if the Republicans do take over the House, nothing's going to get done, or the Senate. Biden can veto, the kind of bills that the Republicans are talking about banning abortion federally and cutting Medicare and Social Security and, other terrible things they want to do. So it's going to be gridlock. A little done if the Democrats are in there that, is semi-progressive, but nothing if the Republicans are in there. And of course, as I mentioned, the top issue for the people is inflation and the economy more generally. And the Democrats are not criticizing the Fed for raising interest rates to raise unemployment as though it was a wage price spiral that is driving inflation. It is not. And that's easy to prove. I will in a minute. Meanwhile, the Democrats are continuing to privatize Medicare and Medicaid with private insurance management of public insurance beneficiaries, which drives up healthcare costs. It doesn't drive down inflation because these for-profit entities deny treatments and reimbursements in order to increase their profits and their excessive executive compensation. And, what did Biden do? He appointed Liz Fowler, who was the insurance executive who wrote the Affordable Care Act, during the Obama administration, which is public subsidies for private insurance. And now she was appointed by Biden to be the director of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation. And that's about privatizing Medicare and Medicaid. Her goal now is to have all public insurance beneficiaries, in other words, people in Medicare and Medicaid, managed by private health insurance, Medicare Advantage and things like that by 2030, 100% by 2030. That is the Democratic alternative to the Republicans who just want to cut the public insurance to the bone. It really gives us a poor choice. Democrats could be calling for an excess profits tax because corporate profits account for more than half of the inflation. The Economic Policy Institute had a study out this week. You may have seen Representative Katie Porter with a chart promoting this or bringing this up in a hearing this week. But corporate profits this year are 54% of inflation compared to an average of 11% between 1979 and 2021. Corporate profits is the biggest cause of inflation. The difference in non-labor costs between the rise, the proportion of inflation, this year is 38% compared to an average 79 to 2021 of 27%. And that's explained by the post-COVID supply chain issues, which are getting resolved, and the scarcities coming out of the Ukraine war, particularly in fossil fuels and grains, although the exports have been getting out of Ukraine recently. Question is, in the future, their harvests are going to be lower because of the war. And then the third category is wages. They accounted for 61% of the increase in the cost of living between 1979 and 2021. This year, it's 8%. Real wages were flat during that period when they accounted for 61% of all inflation. They're behind the rate of inflation. Their real wages have declined this year. Yet the Democrats, the only thing you hear from Biden is, blame Putin for the war. That's a small part of it. But corporate profits, Biden didn't get out there this week and beg the oil companies not to raise prices at the pump. That's going to work. Like these guys are in business to make as much money as they can, even if they price gouge. And all Biden wants to do is jawbone at them. It's pathetic. Now, there are a few progressives like Katie Porter, and Bernie Sanders is going to go on a tour to talk about, progressive economic alternatives. The problem is the whole Democratic Party, the Democratic leadership is not with them. They're marginal in the Democratic Party because the leadership doesn't want to bite the corporate hands that feed their campaign finance coffers. So the Democrats' dumb campaigns may hand veto power over to the Republicans. And all I can say is that's why we need a Green Party to get stronger and be running strong progressive campaigns all across the country. We got to start at the local level, but we get local candidates elected, and then they got a foundation for running for state legislatures in the Congress, in the House anyway. And if we can do that, we can change the terms of debate and action. It is so necessary now because, as I said during the campaign, all these progressives that think they're going to vote for the Democrats, they're voting to stop the Republicans, but their voice is lost. They get lost in the sauce because if they're for Medicare for all or a Green New Deal or tuition-free public college or, universal child care, the Democrats don't support that. And if you vote for them, nobody knows you support that. And that's why we got to be voting for third parties when they're on the ballot, those are progressive third parties. So anyway, I took almost half an hour to do that little rant, but that's what's on my mind. I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Howie, Wyatt Reed tweeted earlier that the U.S. military is going into Ukraine. How will this change things? I don't know who Wyatt Reed is. The U.S. military, no, that's been Biden's policy from the beginning has been we're not going to have our troops fighting Russian troops. We don't want World War III. Now, there is reporting that there are special forces or CIA operators providing intelligence and logistics support. And I find that problematic. They don't need to go in country to do that. If the U.S. military did go in, it would change things. It would basically, make Putin's false narrative that he's fighting the West, not Ukraine, true. So that would be a stupid thing for the U.S. to do. And I follow this closely. I haven't seen any reporting. I don't know who Wyatt Reed is. Frankie Lee. And is using nukes a real threat? Putin has said many times that, everything's on the table, as the U.S. has many times, like with Iran. Every time the U.S. says all options are on the table, they're telling whoever they're telling that to that we got nuclear weapons and we might use them. And Putin's been saying that since the day one of this 2022 invasion. I think it's a bluff because militarily, to use tactical nukes in Ukraine would not help his military. Tactical nukes were developed to deal with large military formations, and this war is being fought in small units, small artillery and infantry on the front lines. If you use a tactical nuke, you wipe out your own people as well as the people you're fighting. And then the radiation can blow back into your country, Russia. It just makes no military sense. So I'm not that worried that they're going to go nuclear on purpose. The danger is, and this is always with us, that they'll have a mistake. As we speak, both Russia and NATO are engaged in nuclear maneuvers, war maneuvers. Russia up in near the Arctic, over by Finland, and the U.S. in the North Sea, between Norway and the United Kingdom. And, there can be mistakes. In fact, I was hearing, didn't catch all the news, but some Russian jet accidentally launched a missile in the Black Sea. That's by Ukraine. And, the reporters were speculating. They doubted that Russia did it on purpose. It was probably some pilot playing around with the buttons, because the launch, you just don't push one button. You got to do a whole procedure. So, there's probably a Russian pilot that's now, in prison or doing something, because that was very provocative. And apparently the Russians and Americans and NATO talk to each other. And so that chilled out. But the problem is you can have misinterpretation of intent. We almost had that in 1983. NATO was going through nuclear exercises, and Russia thought it was for real. It was the first strike getting prepared. So they were considering a first strike to preempt it. It came close. I mean, that's the kind of thing you got to worry about. Or just, if there are field commanders with tactical nukes, they can launch them on their own initiative, without it coming from the top. So I'm not so worried that Putin or certainly NATO is going to start a nuclear war. I'm more worried there'll be an accident or some rogue commander, which is all the more reason why, part of our demands around the Ukraine war should be for the U.S. to go to Russia and say, we want to get back to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty, which the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from. And it's true that, especially on intermediate range nuclear forces, Putin was pushing the edges of that. But we should have used the treaty to push him back from the edge. Instead, we just got out of it, thanks to John Bolton and that idiot Trump. So there's a lot we could do, and those would be peace initiatives, to tell Russia, we don't want a war. We want some kind of security agreement. And we could go back to, what happened before the war. I mean, Putin came forward with a demand that NATO, within a few weeks, pull back to the 1997 borders, which was not a realistic demand. NATO wasn't going to do that. Putin knew they weren't going to do that. It was a posture. The response to the U.S. was, we're not going to do that, but we're willing to talk about these weapons agreements. And there are SALT negotiations going on. That's strategic arms. So the U.S. should, take a much more proactive force. If we want negotiations, I don't think it should be telling the Ukrainians to concede land for so-called peace. It should be about a larger security architecture that includes Russia and all of Europe and the North Atlantic, so that we can disarm both conventionally and with nukes and head toward that treaty on abolition, or what's called Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, that's been adopted by over 50 countries, none of them nuclear. The U.S. could take a lot of initiatives there. And that, that would deal with the real threat, and that is accidental or a nuclear war that gets kicked off by not the intent from the top, but either an accident or misunderstanding around these war games or a rogue commander. So the Ukraine war should bring the disarmament question forward. And unfortunately, this is another thing. There's nothing about this in this Republican-Democratic debate over the congressional elections. No discussion. That's why we need the Green Party. We got to get stronger and force this onto the public agenda. Betty Dimmitt. There is a coalition of EU nations that aimed at a 700% increase in renewable energy production as a defense against Russia's fossil fuel dominance. This is what the U.S. should be doing in response to Middle East decisions regarding production and sale quotas. Instead, we have representative, quote unquote, leaders talking about how to best punish the nations involved in loosening the locks on U.S. reserves. Yeah, I mean, the dependence on fossil fuels and what it's doing. This is a big, factor in the input side of inflation, and that is, the cost of oil and gas, which feeds through the whole economy, and that's why Biden should declare a climate emergency. So even if Congress is an obstacle, he has lots of things he could do with emergency powers to push us down the path toward renewables. The U.S. did respond positively to Bill McKibben's suggestion. It was in an article called "Heat Pumps for Peace and Freedom." The basic idea was to help Europe get through this winter to heat themselves without relying on gas or so much on gas. We should be doing the same thing for climate reasons as well as economic reasons to reduce inflation. And you're right. Instead, we're releasing more gas or more oil from the oil reserves, and Biden is jawboning, U.S. oil and gas companies to increase production. Again, they're going to do what's in their interest, which is if supply is down, demand is high, and the price goes up, and their profits go up. So, it's just ineffectual, and it's not what we need to do. That conference I was on this morning I'm calling it Green New Deal for Ukraine. They didn't title it that way, but they were talking, that's what they're talking about. They were referencing the Green New Deal in Europe and more generally. And they're talking about how, they need renewables to get off gas because gas infrastructure is vulnerable to attack, which means increasing electricity from renewables and then installing heat pumps so they don't have to heat their homes with gas. And then I won't go into everything they talked about. It was really good. I mean, everything from green hydrogen to nuclear power, very informed discussion, very serious discussion. These are not armchair academics. They are, some of them are academics, but they are involved in, socialist organizations and trade unions. Eric Gray, if you were governor of Florida, what would you say to the people in Florida in regard to the ecological reality of disasters like Hurricane Ian? Well, I would say we need a new development model. We can't be building sprawl development in land that is subject to flooding from hurricanes and sea level rise. Given the sea level rise built into the Earth system now, places like Miami are going to become flooded. So we need a Green New Deal for Florida that is about, rebuilding housing and infrastructure on a sustainable basis on land that is safe from flooding, which is a massive job. And unlike DeSantis, who, doesn't want anything from the federal government unless it's disaster relief, even though when in Congress he voted against disaster relief for New York from that hurricane a few years ago. It's going to take the federal level, because they can raise the funds by progressive taxation that you can't raise at the state level, because by statute and constitution, states have to have balanced budgets. Now, Florida doesn't have an income tax, if I recall, which would be a good progressive move. So you could raise more funds in a progressive manner and then put that into a Green New Deal for Florida. So those are some of the things, I would run on: a Green New Deal for Florida, progressive income tax, and generally an economic bill of rights. Provide the basic needs of the people as rights and services, not commodities. I'm talking about education, healthcare, energy, broadband, public transportation, and rather than relying on the private sector, which is only going to provide it to the people that can pay, and a lot of people get left out. And it costs more because they got to pay for profits and excessive executive salaries, stock buybacks to raise the value of their stocks, and all that nonsense. Could an eco-socialist actually pull it off and beat out both parties in a state like Florida, though? Well, not in one campaign, but I think over not that many years. It has to start at the grassroots level, where then, green eco-socialists demonstrate that they are responsible, effective public servants as legislators and mayors. And then that creates a basis for electing Greens to the state legislature and governor. And then you've got to have, a good public information campaign to explain what the Green New Deal and progressive taxation are in terms that people grasp and understand and see as in their interest. Because as soon as you say we need a progressive income tax, the right is going to say, "Oh, you're raising everybody's taxes." No, we're not. We're going to cut taxes for the low income people and maybe the middle income people, raise them on the upper and particularly the super rich. And we may be able, because we can raise so much money that way, to cut regressive taxes like sales and property taxes. So, in addition to income, we can tax wealth, estates, um, financial transactions. Well, maybe not so much in Florida. That's something we can do in New York because we have the New York Stock Exchange. But um, there's a lot we could do to raise the public funds we need that, uh, you know, relieves the tax burden of hardworking, lower income people and shifts it to the people that can afford it. So that I think is a winning argument. It's just we got to have a damn party with people campaigning on it effectively, seriously. I mean, we can't just run these half-ass campaigns where we say I'm the green candidate and show up in sandals and cut off jeans to a debate. I mean, I've seen that. In fact, I've seen one guy announce his campaign butt naked. Um, so that kind of stuff doesn't help us. It's got to be serious. We got to take the people we're talking to seriously, give them respect. Otherwise, we're not going to get their votes. But we can do that. You look at the public opinion polls, I've said many times, on particularly economic class issues, the Green Party is way ahead of the Democrats and Republicans on things like Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, tuition-free public college, progressive taxation or tax the rich. The people are with us. We got to get organized and then organize those people, and we can win these elections. I think anywhere. And people right off the South, no. The South is changing. Uh, Black people are a substantial minority, if not a majority, in much of the South. There are lots of Latin American immigrants there, Asian immigrants. It's not just a white supremacist electorate that dominated it for so long. It's going to change, and the Democratic victories, say for Senate in Georgia, uh, indicate where it's going. The problem is the Democrats don't have real solutions, and when they don't provide them, then people switch back to the Republicans, and this back and forth two-party government system where whether it's the Democrats or Republicans win, the rich people that pay for both parties win, and the rest of us are left out. So, yeah, I think it can be done, but it's got to be a movement and a party well organized at the grassroots. Needs to be a membership party so the members can keep their elected officials and their representatives to the state party or state committee or whatever accountable, so they have rights as well as responsibilities as members. This idea that the Greens are just those who pick up the ballot on primary day or register if the state keeps party registrations. That's not membership. That's just telling the state which ballot you're going to get. And those people that are Green supporters but not organized as members really don't have any say. It's an elitist structure, which unfortunately the Greens have copied from the Democrats and Republicans. The traditional left-wing structure is a mass membership party where you join the party, you agree to its principles, you pay a due so it has resources, because we're not going to be funded by the rich. We don't want to be. And if we don't do that, we're not serious. We need a real party. And that's really, to me, what's missing in American politics. Because the people are way ahead of the two-party politicians we got right now on issues that concern us about economic justice, the climate, and peace. And it's just a matter of the left getting its act together and organizing this party. Amy L. Sachs. Robin Harris is a Green Party rep candidate in Florida. She seems very cool, and I'm sure it's an uphill battle, but she tweets about the hurricane aftermath often. Yeah, I know Robin. She's a great candidate. She's a great person. And yeah, Florida is suffering. That hurricane really hit it hard. And, I wish Robin the best. And where are we? I'm thinking I should invite her on to the podcast next Saturday if she's up for it. She'd be a good guest, and maybe that would help her campaign. So thanks for bringing Robin up. Kevin Sanchez, why do you think the January 6th committee hearings has apparently had so little effect on Republican vote share? Because most Americans don't follow the news because it's painful. I mean, there's so much bad news and so many things to worry about. They don't follow it because they feel powerless. So why aggravate yourself if you can't do anything about it? That is the attitude of a lot of people. So a lot of people have been paying attention. They don't know, what has been uncovered as to, how far Trump and his minions went to try to steal that election. So I think that's probably the main reason. There's not enough people paying attention. And then you've got a substantial minority, maybe 30% of the country is going to, follow Trump, even if he says jump out the seventh floor. They'll do it because they've just put their trust in him and this, right-wing media echo chamber, Fox News, Newsmax, their various podcasts and online publications who, live in an alternate reality. It isn't the real reality. And so, they're following them. There was a rally in Batavia, New York, recently put on by General Flynn's, what's the name of that group? Reclaim America or something like that. And it was over 3,000 right-wingers paying at least $250 a head to get in, to listen to speeches from General Flynn, Roger Stone, the dirty trickster, bunch of right-wingers like that, and Robert Kennedy, who was hawking his anti-vax books and videos. And so there's a conspiracy mindedness to these folks. And then they had a vendor's place where they were selling new age crystals to get your vibes right, blankets to protect you from 5G radiation, organic beauty products, and General Flynn's favorite gold buyer, or who you go to buy and sell gold. So it was a money-making thing too, and there were a lot of suckers there on this right wing. And the problem is those people also spend a lot of money on guns and ammo, and some of them are ready to go to battle. And I'm afraid we're going to see that happen pretty soon because they're being egged on by Trump and his crowd, and because they really believe the election was stolen, even though the evidence isn't there. I mean, Trump sued 46 times about election fraud. He lost every lawsuit about the 2020 election, and this is going to judges that were appointed by him, as well as previous Republicans. A lot of those cases. So, their alternate reality isn't real, but they believe it, and that's a problem. Richard Pink, the Republicans took the White House 6 years after they were established. Why can't the Green Party formulate a plan to take the White House by 2028? I don't know if you can, plan, because I don't think the Republicans had a plan in 1844. Maybe it was 8 years, 1842, when the Republicans formed. Anyway, what they did was they built it from the bottom up. They elected thousands of people to local office, state office, and increasingly in the Congress. There were free soilers in the Congress as well. That was a third party into which a lot of Republicans went, or into which a lot of free soilers went into the Republican Party. So that by the time Lincoln ran in 1860, the largest caucus in Congress was the Republican caucus. When he ran in 1860, he was not a third party candidate. He was a first party candidate. But, what the Republicans did should be our model. They ran from the bottom up and they built a base. They got in Congress, and once they had established themselves a credible party in Congress, they became a credible party in the presidential election. The other thing we need to do, which they didn't talk about back then, although some of the radical Republicans during Reconstruction did, and that is to go to proportional representation. Ranked choice voting for executive offices, proportional ranked choice voting for the House, and in the case of the Senate, it has to be ranked choice voting until we reform the Senate. And also ranked choice voting for president. That would get rid of the spoiler problem, which really hurts the Greens because people vote defensively for the Democrats against the Republicans, even when they like the Greens more. And then the problem of gerrymandering, which is what happens when you have single member winner take all districts. If you have multi-member proportionally represented districts, it doesn't really matter where you draw the district lines, which means you can't gerrymander. With gerrymandering, what we have now in this country is 95% of state legislative districts are non-competitive, and over 90% of the House districts are. They're one-party districts. So, if you live in a Republican district that's, got a decent Republican majority, you can vote and vote and vote and vote for that Democrat, every 2 years. You're not going to change it. What's the point? That's why a lot of people don't vote. They know who's going to win. That's why we need the electoral reforms as well. I don't think the electoral reforms are prerequisite for repeating what the Republicans did, but the left really has to get its act together. At the same time, we should be pushing for these electoral reforms because it's more democratic. Every political viewpoint should get its proportional share of representation in legislative bodies and not have the political minorities like the Greens in terms of votes or the Libertarians or whoever only get to raise their voice in elections. And even then it's hard. I mean, you see the sign, I'm running for governor. I'm doing it as a write-in candidate because they totally changed ballot access in New York and wiped out all the independent smaller parties. We're not on the ballot. So I may have a debate with the Libertarian this coming week, and the Democrats and the Republicans can't get together to have a debate. We may have the only debate. So that's another project I'm working on. And, stay tuned to my Twitter feed and Facebook and social media. And, by midweek or Thursday, we may have a debate. And it may be the only one because Spectrum, New York One, Spectrum News is sponsoring a debate on Wednesday. Hochul, the Democrat, has agreed, but the Republican, Zeldin, has not committed. Zeldin's saying, I want a bunch of debates. He's been saying that for a month. He's not getting them because Hochul won't debate him. I tweeted yesterday, hey, I'll show up in Zeldin's place on Wednesday. And if Zeldin wants a bunch of debates, I'll show up in Hochul's place then. In fact, I'll show up to any debate with any number of candidates anywhere. Of course, we have to organize our own debate because the media is not doing it, but that's what we're going to do with independent media. In any case, the plan is build from the bottom up and fight for ranked choice voting and proportional representation. Paul Flansburgh, would you recognize Maduro in Venezuela? What would you do in? Would you improve relations with Cuba? Yeah, I think the U.S. should diplomatically recognize Maduro. I have criticisms of Maduro, but criticisms of just about every government, including my own. And with Cuba, yeah, the blockade has been going on for over 60 years. Supposedly, it was supposed to encourage liberalization in terms of, political rights, independent parties, trade unions, and so forth. It hasn't. And Cuba is not as bad as a lot of countries we don't sanction, like Saudi Arabia. So, let's stop the hypocrisy. Cuba, needs the blockade would help the people of Cuba a lot economically. So, lift the blockade, restore normal diplomatic relations with Cuba. I'm for that. Paul Flansburgh, would you offer land back to indigenous communities in New York State? Yeah, and I would get the federal law changed because the problem here in New York now is that the Onondaga, who are, adjacent to me, I could almost throw a rock into Onondaga territory from here. Well, not really. It's about a mile away, maybe a mile and a half. And they brought a land claim, and they weren't saying, give us land that other people are living on. They were saying, give us a say in development decisions and environmental decisions. They basically want to veto over bad development. And we will recognize the title of people, they're not their title, but their usufruct, their ability to stay on the land, the homes they live in, and so forth. So it was very friendly to the people also already here. And the federal court said, you're too late. You should have done this 100 years ago. And that really undermined all the land claims across the country and in New York State. The only way to change that is by a federal law overruling that decision and saying, treaties they're the highest law in the land. They're as high as the Constitution itself. It says so in the Constitution. We need to honor those treaties. And that means, negotiating. Now, if I was governor of New York, I would initiate negotiations with the indigenous nations about, land and tenure, and that's the word I was looking for, and, offering indigenous people more of the land they traditionally lived on, but doing it in a way that, didn't hurt the people already, living on those lands, without harming those lands. So the policy of the state of New York has been basically to avoid relationships with those communities, those nations. In fact, Governor Hochul, there was money the Seneca set aside from their gambling profits that were supposed to be paid as kind of a tax, but there were some outstanding issues and they wanted to negotiate them. And instead, Hochul seized that money and handed it over to the billionaire owner of the Buffalo Bills to build a damn new stadium that he could afford to build himself. And it just so happens that the governor's husband has concessions in the stadium and gambling interests around the stadium in Buffalo area, which will benefit from the new stadium. I mean, it is crooked as can be. It may be, legal by the letter of the law, but by, the spirit of morality and law, it is a crime. It's legalized theft. And they took that money from the Seneca Nation. The Senecas are really angry about it, like as well as I am, just for the corporate welfare and, cronyism it represents. So anyway, the main thing is, as governor, I would talk with the nations of the state about the land issue and, negotiate mutually agreeable resolutions. Andrew Hager, Howie, speaking of benefits, what do you hope to do to help the railroaders on strike? Well, if there's a picket line around here, I will go out there and picket with them. And I've been looking for what kind of help they're asking for. And the railroaders, we talked about this maybe a month ago when the tentative agreement was announced, and I said, well, let's wait till the people vote, the members of the unions vote, because the big issue for them was their work schedules and having to be on call 24/7 and show up within 2 hours for long shifts. It just made, personal life, family life impossible. And that was a huge issue. It was not resolved. And so they voted down the contract. So I'll be looking for, what kind of help they're asking for and doing what I can to provide it. Billy from Texas. What were the factors that led to Nader's good green presidential run? What are the lessons there? Well, Nader's, he ran as he stood for election, spent less than $5,000 in 1996. What he did then, and I think it was testing the waters for him, is he let us use his name to petition to get on the ballot. And I forget how many states. It was over 20. We got on the ballot, and I think that told Nader that there really is a Green Party movement out there, and it would be good to run again. And he had concluded, when was it? He ran in New Hampshire, none of the above campaign at one point. You go back to 92. He had concluded that you needed to put these issues before in the presidential race because they were getting nowhere in Congress. I mean, back in the 60s and early 70s, he could notify members of Congress of an issue, a hearing would be called, and legislation would follow. And once they got, it started in the Carter administration and Reagan administration sort of nailed the door shut. You couldn't get into Congress. They were not responsive. The money took over even more. And, reformers like Nader, were persona non grata. People say, oh, Nader spoiled his reputation by running in 2000 and spoiling the election. Hell, he had a bad reputation with those corporate Democrats long before 2000. And, the kind of stuff they say publicly now, they were saying privately back then. So 2000, two things happened. One is he saw the Greens could actually get him on the ballot. The other thing was we had this global justice movement, sometimes called anti-globalization, but it was really, against the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, these trade agreements, these so-called, Nader calls them corporate managed trade agreements. They're not free trade, it's corporate managed trade. The people are left out in these resolution dispute tribunals. It's just corporations and states, and so there was a mass movement, and he became the voice of that movement in that 2000 election. Unfortunately, 9/11 happened the next year, and that killed that movement. I was part of it. A lot of people got scared. The Patriot Act passed, and people were afraid, that there'd be repression. And then the others felt like, well, we can't talk about this stuff now that we're, responding to the 9/11, disaster, tragedy. So that killed that movement, and the movement that, had given Nader a lift. The other thing that happened after that election was the backlash from the Democrats who blamed Nader when in fact there are scores of factors that caused Gore to lose to Bush. For example, black voter suppression in Florida was massive under Harris, who was the co-chair of Bush's campaign. Media went back a year later, counted the votes every which way because the ballots were preserved, and they found out Gore actually won in Florida. I could go on and on. Instead they blamed Nader. There was a socialist candidate that year, David McReynolds, who ran for U.S. Senate on the Green Party line in New York one time. And he used to joke, why do they blame Nader? I caused it too. I got more votes than the margin of difference between Bush and Gore that was, reported when the Supreme Court stopped the count. He says, why don't they blame me? So, but they blame Nader, and it stuck to a large degree with, many of the Democrats. So that made it more difficult for the Greens. In fact, there were people in the Greens who wanted to push Nader away because now he was being attacked. I think that was a huge mistake. And we ended up in 2004 with another candidate instead of Nader. And we were very divided at that moment. So what are the lessons to learn here? One is we got to be clear about independent politics. There'll be good times and bad times. We may be accused of spoiling an election, but that doesn't take away from our argument for independent political action by the left against the two corporate parties. We need to build stronger organization. It can't just be campaigns, periodic campaigns. It's got to be, like I was talking about earlier, a mass membership party where people, pay dues, participate in local branches of the party, and are active between as well as during elections. So, organization is a huge thing. I think those would be the two lessons I would draw. We got to educate people on why we need to be independent, and we got to be a real party, organized, a mass membership party. I think on balance, there was a lot of positive stuff out of Nader's campaign. A lot of people got their first education in electoral politics and have continued expanding on what they learned in that campaign. And, it put the Greens on the map of the media nationally. And so even though they're, tropes or that we spoil elections, they don't ignore us. They're thinking about us. And it's better to be, named and part of the discussion than totally ignored. So I think the net result was positive. So no more questions coming up because it's been an hour. And I didn't have a chance to read any of the chat. I'm going to do that when we sign off here. But thanks everybody for being here. I think my theme today is we got to get serious. Climate isn't stopping. We got this terrible war going on in Europe. The people around the world are rising up, demanding democracy in countries like Haiti, Iran. I didn't mention Sri Lanka, any number of other countries. It's a big election coming up in Brazil between a fascist and a progressive Democrat, Lula. There's a lot going on in the world. And I guess, the thing that I talked about at the beginning is we've got to be part of an international green socialist movement. You can't have socialism in one country. You can't fight imperialism by supporting some other reactionary power that's against U.S. imperialism. We got to overthrow capitalism and the imperialist system in the U.S. It's got to come from within. These reactionary countries like Iran and Syria and Russia, they're not going to stop U.S. imperialism. U.S. has lost all the wars pretty much since World War II, except for a few minor invasions, Grenada, Panama, the ones we got involved in, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, many others, we lost. But that doesn't stop the military-industrial complex. They win or lose, they make money. So we got to change it, instead of shipping that off to reactionaries in other countries. That's just it's not a leftist position. That's a reactionary position, in my opinion. So anyway, let's build the Green Party and keep fighting. And I'll see you next week, maybe with Robin Harris. I'm gonna give her a call and see if she wants to come on. So take care, everybody. Have a good week.